Again, welcome back to the series on COVID-19 politics and policy. We have largely focused up to this point on the politics of COVID-19, thinking about the impact that our different levels of government have in making decisions regarding COVID-19. And the last couple lectures we had focused on the role of data. And we're now making completely the transition to thinking about the policy implications, both in terms of public health, but also in terms of other outcomes. And today we're very fortunate to be joined by Jeff Finkle, who's the president and CEO of the International Economic Development Council. He's certainly a recognized leader in the field of economic development and was around at the time of the formation of the IEDC in 2001, which really merged the Council for Urban Economic Development and the American Economic Development Council. And with the former, he had served as president for 15 years. Today, IEDC is the world's largest economic development organization with over 5,000 members and a $6 million annual operational budget. Renowned for its leadership on economic development and training economic developers across the country in terms of professionalizing them. Prior to this role, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and received many awards for the job that he did around sustainable economic development. He's also helped to, on the philanthropic side, organize a number of efforts, including organizing more than 250 economic development volunteers in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina to help with rebuilding efforts, as well as starting and serving as president of the Bollinger Foundation, a nonprofit that is aimed at delivering financial assistance to children. He currently serves as the Arlington, Virginia Economic Development Commission, or on the commission, the Alexandria, Virginia Economic Development Corporation Board, ACT's Advisory Board for Work-Ready Communities, and also the president of the Bollinger Foundation. He's appeared on CBS Sunday Morning, Fox TV, General Report on PBS, and more recently has been in the Wall Street Journal around Amazon Headquarter 2.0 decisions. He has a bachelor's degree from Ohio University and additional work in business administration at Ohio State University, and currently has a fellowship role at the Ohio University's Voinovich School for Leadership and Public Affairs. So on behalf of UMBC and the Department of Political Science, as well as the Center for Social Science Scholarship, we're very glad to have you here today, President Finkle. Thank you.
Great. Can you hear me now, Eric?
Yes, great. You are coming through very well. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, there's always more than one way, right?
That's right, exactly. And maybe that's a touchdown for what we're going through today, right? So we're very glad to have you here and absolutely look forward to your discussion of economic development today.
Yeah, and please call me Jeff, Eric.
Okay.
That's what I prefer, and anybody who asks any questions, I've never been comfortable being called Mr. Finkle for some reason. Now, you were able to share my slides, are you?
Yeah, I can go ahead and share those. I think you'll just need to let me know when you want me to advance.
So, yeah, and let me, Eric, you and I haven't talked in a while. So here is what I'm thinking about doing today, and I want to make sure the presentation that you have in front of you, everyone, is a presentation we were making after the CARES Act was passed. And the CARES Act is the major expenditures that the United States government agreed to undertake at dealing with the coronavirus. For the most part, not all this money is back, but a fair amount of this is history. And Eric, I'm getting some feedback. Are you hearing that as well?
Let me try to mute myself.
Actually, that did deal with the feedback, but you may have to come back and answer the question that I'm laying out. I'm assuming people don't want to get into the weeds with each of the various programs that Congress passed, but rather deal with the policy questions that the Congress dealt with and the administration dealt with. So I'm going to talk, unless you tell me differently, Eric, I'm going to talk about the politics of disaster. I'm going to talk about what we had in front of us with this $2.3 trillion. And I'm going to talk about the next version of this that is has been under negotiation for some period of time. And we're probably closer today than we were in June or July when the House passed the HEROES Act, which the administration rejected and the Republicans in the Senate rejected. But as many of you have probably noticed, Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, and Pelosi have been negotiating on CARES Act 2.2 or 2.0 or HEROES Act or whatever we're going to call a next version. Does that sound good for you, Eric?
Yes, that sounds great.
Okay. So let's just advance the slides a couple, and we'll get into. We can pass on that. We can actually pass on that since I've kind of indicated what we're going to talk about. So let's talk about the original CARES Act. Now, the CARES Act literally is trying to resolve 3 or 4 issues. Issue 1, we needed to come up with a fair amount of money to deal with the healthcare crisis that we were impacted upon by the coronavirus or COVID-19. So as we walk through this, you're going to see some money set aside for healthcare, for hospitals, for first responders, for testing, for people who can't afford to go into the hospital to deal with the coronavirus. The $2.3 trillion was part of it was set up for those things, additional PPE, et cetera. Second, we had an economy that was shut down. So, and it is still in many places shut down. And so there were a number of tools put into this breadbasket of things to deal with an economy that was struggling. We will talk about the payroll protection plan that was put up to help small businesses maintain existing employment. And there was a time when, many small businesses just completely shut, but the PPP program allowed them to continue to pay some payroll as we tried to figure out how soon we would restore an economy. Third, how did we help people? And there were a lot of people that lost jobs very early on. And the Congress decided, and this is controversial now, that they would give enhanced unemployment benefits to people to the tune of about, if I remember correctly, $600 a week in addition to normal, what they normally would receive. And that is one of the sticking points in this next round of negotiations. And finally, there was money put on the table for state and local governments to help deal with some of the unexpected costs of the coronavirus. So, and as I said, I'm not going to go into, there was $5 billion for CDBG, which you can see on the, but I wanted to give you an idea of why the Congress was putting out money. They could have put it in a variety of different buckets. We will go through and see some of those buckets. In this slide, there's $376 billion SBA grants and guarantees, $150 billion in states, and $5 billion for the Community Development Block Grant Program. Let's go to the next slide, Eric, and now I'll speed up. You know, there was probably no aspect of the economy that wasn't harmed by the coronavirus, from museums and arts councils to manufacturers to, and one of the hidden things in the monies that Congress came up with is what they did for Treasury and the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has carried out a very important role in building new lending tools during the course of this virus. There are a lot of large landlords around the country that they're trying to figure out how to renegotiate or recapitalize their buildings so they can pass on some of the savings to tenants who are producing relatively no income at this particular point in time. Much of the other things that we will talk about today, and you may have talked about in the past, are specific tools and how those specific tools are used. But the Federal Reserve was given an inordinate amount of money, and then they have some of their own tools to allow refinancing, where, frankly, they may be taking a complete pass on repaying mortgages during 2020 and maybe even into 2021. And in theory, they should be able to pass along those savings to their tenants. Now, what do they want out of their tenants? What they want out of their tenants is, for those that survive, they want them to sign an additional year or two to their leases so that they have an opportunity to get it back from the existing tenants and what they will end up paying in the future from future tenants. Let's go to the next one, Eric. So the big deal for small business ended up being the payroll protection plan or the payroll protection program. And essentially what that was, it was allowed businesses to borrow money that they could keep as a grant if they kept a certain number of employees on their payroll. It helped them pay some of their overhead costs, some of their health care costs, and payroll during a period of time. Now, this was a very popular program. Congress ended up adding more money to the program. And in the next version of, if there is a second version, there may be some additional PPP money put into the next program. There is going to be a lot of gift money, that's what you would have to call it, or grant money, to a lot of businesses, whether they needed it or not. Some businesses would have gotten PPP money. They would have stayed as profitable as normal. As long as they kept their employees on, they will get it back as a grant and not have to repay it. And that's, but I think for many companies, this was a complete salvation. Let's go to the next one, Eric. And if people have specific questions that I can answer later, we will go through it. Another program SBA put out, which has been in existence for a long time, is the Emergency Injury Disaster Loan, or the EIDL program. I like to make fun of the name of this. The companies are idle. They're not doing much, but they're given a grant to try to get back into business. You will find the EIDL program is actually used quite effectively, frankly, after hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, tornadoes, all types of disasters. This has been part of the SBA programs for a long time. Let's go to the next one. Let's pass on that. let's pass on that one as well. These are just going deeper into the EIDL and PPP programs. There was also some support for minority business development centers, small business development centers, women-owned business centers, so that as these small companies try to regroup after the coronavirus is gone, that there were programs in place and organizations supported by SBA. My guess is, frankly, there's going to be more money needed for these. The number of businesses that have gone out of business is pretty phenomenal at this point. And when you look at specific demographic groups like African American entrepreneurs, the numbers are even greater. I spoke at the Kauffman Foundation at their Entrepreneurship Summit about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, and I pointed out, and there's a common statistic in economic development or entrepreneurship development, that people that go out of business and small businesses will oftentimes come back as an entrepreneur a second, third time. If you look at some of the very famous entrepreneurs, they actually bellied up a couple times. I think that one of the issues that we have to deal with as a country is to figure out how to find many of these entrepreneurs that have just lost a business, get as much debt off of them as possible, and try to help them get back into business once the coronavirus has passed. And I specifically want us to focus on things like minority entrepreneurs, because the amount that have failed is just a very undesirable number, and we need to get those people back into business. Let's move on, Eric, please. HUD got a fair amount of money. I used to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Community Development Block Grant Program. What they did in this CARES Act is they gave HUD 1 year's additional funding effectively. I think the current national annual appropriation is about $4 billion. In block grant dollars, they gave them 5. And with some formulas to support that. And so it's important that HUD get that money on the streets as quickly as possible. The 3 national criteria for the CDBG program is eliminating slums and blight, assisting low and moderate income neighborhoods, and meeting an emergency need. And all 3 of those certainly are issues that we're running into with this virus. Let's move on to the next slide. We don't, since people aren't going to be collecting grants here, we can move on to the next one. And move on again. One of the things that were on those previous slides, typically it takes a long time for the government to respond on the CDBG. There was a fair amount of regulatory requirement waiving, so that they could get the money on the streets as quickly as possible. And remember, that would have been one of the things Congress was trying to do, as opposed to have people struggling, have businesses struggling, have governments struggling. Part of what they did with the CARES Act is they built it for speed, meaning let's get as many of the governmental and bureaucratic issues moved aside so we can get money on the street as quickly as possible. Now, we had more to do as an organization with this $1.5 billion that went to EDA. I think we helped them with the carve-out to make sure that money could be used for salaries and expenses. A typical year of funding for the EDA is about $300 million. They would have landed 5 times the amount of money they normally handled at one time, so they were going to need additional consultant staffing to help them manage the amount of money that they got. Now, they have been getting more money in the past because we've been trying to educate the Congress that they are a good agency for dealing with the economic issues around disasters. So they've received $1.2 billion in the two previous supplementals. That's Congress's fancy way of saying emergency spending or disaster spending that they need to do after major disasters. So EDA has been ramping up over time, and Congress, I think, has been seeing how important they have been to that process. Next, Eric. And let's pass on that one. Needless to say, rural communities were also hit hard. So the Congress put in $145 million to rural development for the Cooperative Extension Service, rural broadband, and telemedicine. And as many of you know, if you've had to go to the doctor over the last few months, you may have met with your doctor for the first time ever over the internet. And that will be one of the things that will be, other than Zoom and all these other platforms, telemedicine took a big jump forward as a result of the coronavirus. And some of it was funded, and some of it was just by absolute necessity of doctors not wanting people with the coronavirus necessarily walk into their office, or if they had somebody in their office with the coronavirus, they didn't want it to be given to other people. So if you could have an observation by a doctor over the internet, that was safer for everybody. Let's move forward, Eric. Additional, there was money for states, tribes, and local governments. I talked about this $150 billion that the Congress put out to deal with immediate issues of local governments. Some of those local governments, by the way, put money into local small businesses as a way of propping up businesses who did not necessarily get a PPP or an EIDL loan or grant. And these things, the negative side of the PPP program is you had to work mostly through a national bank to get funding, a loan effectively. And many small businesses didn't have those relationships, so they weren't able to get the documentation in to be funded. So that's one of the reasons many of the states came up with alternative programs. And in the second round of PPP, the government actually required non-traditional banks, many dealing with the minority community, to get access to SBA PPP money. Let's move further forward. The expanded unemployment insurance, I talked about that a little earlier. As the Congress was thinking about how do they handle the thousands of people, millions of people that were going to lose their jobs, they gave supplemental unemployment insurance. That ran out, and that is a major issue in this next round of CARES Act, HEROES Act, CARES Act 2.0. Let's move on to the next one. So, here is the unemployment benefits. And by the way, Eric, feel free to share this slide presentation with everybody. We're a not-for-profit. We want people to learn from the things we do. We do get government funding. We do get money from foundations. So most of the time we're willing to share what we have. So without going deep into this slide, just share that with everybody along with the full presentation. Let's move on to the next one. There were provisions. Oh, by the way, in that last slide, it also talked about the IRS sending everybody $1,200, which was effectively a grant. You see in the middle, the one-time payment. All taxpayers, I believe, received $1,200 checks at the beginning of the coronavirus, whether you're employed or unemployed. There were some income limitations to that. So if you earned above a certain amount, you didn't receive money. Now remember, all of these little programs were set up to, and let me go back to what I talked about at the beginning, deal with the health issues people were dealing with, help small businesses or businesses generally whose market disappeared with them overnight, help people that were losing jobs, help local governments that were losing taxes, and in one way, this is a little redundant, stimulate the economy, which would help all of the things that I just talked about other than the health issues. Let's move forward, Eric. There were some tax provisions for businesses. Let's move on. There was money, the Department of Health and Human Services has helped traditional low-income communities through the Community Services Block Grant Program. These are particularly low-income neighborhoods. They got $1 billion for the Community Services Block Grant Program. Let's continue. I talked about the Treasury program. One of the things that you can see in the second part of that slide is that with the $454 billion for the Fed, they realized, or they think they could leverage $4 trillion in capital activity. That's where some of those loans or extension of debt to building owners would occur. You will also see in the first half there was $25 billion for air passenger carriers. That money has run out. So you now hear that some of the airlines are talking about or have laid off employees, and that is one of the things in this next bill that everybody is talking about. Let's continue. Looking ahead. So this is where I'm going to talk about the next bill. I'm going to use this. So Pelosi, Mnuchin, the president's chief of staff, who is a terrible negotiator, have all been talking for several months. The House of Representatives passed a $3 trillion HEROES Act in June or July, knowing that there would be another round of money needed. You know, I don't pretend to be an expert in that bill, and it effectively amounted to being what I would call, what many political scientists would call a marker. It said, we've got a bill out there, now let's negotiate. Let's figure out what's in, what's out, what's the right number. And the Republicans in the Senate finally passed within the last 3 weeks a $500 billion number. And there are a couple problems with that bill. One, the House does not want to give carte blanche liability protection to every business where you might get coronavirus or might not. You know, the meat packing industry unfortunately sickened a number of their employees. So the House does not want to just carte blanche say, if you died on the job, you're out of luck, you have no recourse against your employer. The Senate wants to give liability protection to everybody. That's a stumbling block. The Senate bill, I believe, wanted to solve the airline industry problems to the exclusion of the rest of the business world. Pelosi didn't want to nickel and dime things. So, and then there is the big number. You know, how big will that next number will be? And the administration has never been wild for some reason or other about spending a lot of money on testing and tracing or tracking. The House bill puts a lot of money into let's narrow the field down of people that have this and concentrate our efforts around them and get this to be a smaller and smaller universe of people. And finally, if you look around the country, there have been a lot of governments that have been devastated in terms of their gross receipts or their tax revenue coming in, and the House bill wants to put more money into both unemployment compensation and they want something larger than normal unemployment. In some places, normal unemployment compensation is $200 a week, which is not a lot of money. I think there will be some type of compromise around what the next, it may not be $600 a week, but supplemental, but I think there will be a new supplemental. We're trying to get $3 billion in additional money into EDA. I have no clue if we will be successful or not, but that's our little drum that we beat consistently. Let's go ahead, Eric. Let's go ahead. This is an old presentation. Here are a number of resources, and that's the end of this presentation. And let me just add one last thing, and then I will take any questions or comments that people have. And that is, we're talking about a national disaster. But let me also point out that each and every major disaster we have in this country, there is a fair amount of politics around what is the supplemental that will be and how much money will be put out there to solve wildfires in California, or when Katrina, Rita, Gustav, Ike, Dean, Delta, any of the major hurricanes that we've seen, Sandy, which hit the New York, New Jersey, I think Maryland was pretty much escaped it. How much money is going to go in and which agencies are going to be asked to respond? Those all become political decisions, and part of it is how strong is your congressional delegation and how committed are they to getting a lot of money to their constituency and territories that they serve. Sandy probably got a disproportionate amount of money because of the strength of the governor of New Jersey and the governor of New York, and they had strong congressional delegations. When Rita hit the Gulf Coast of Texas, it had a weak delegation and senators that barely were interested in that part of the state, so they didn't get as much money. We're seeing that carried on right now at the national level in the discussions about this next bill. Now, I want to give you two other thoughts. One, in order to fund the $3 trillion and whatever is funded in this next bill, we're going to take on a ton of debt. Our national debt is going to be increased by a significant amount of money to help do this. Is it the right thing to do? Probably. Will people be complaining about what we've done to add to the debt? You can guarantee it. Now, so just as you watch this play out on TV and the newspaper, and I doubt they pass it before the election, but I would think within 2 to 3 weeks after the election, we'll have a bill, I think. The second thing is, I guarantee you that the House Democrats who are writing the bill are rethinking the writing of the bill because they are somewhat convinced or are betting that Biden will be elected president and that they can't increase the debt a ton after he becomes president. So some of the things that they want to fund with Biden as president, major infrastructure investments and things, are going to be hidden in this next bill as a way of giving him some running room and some program money that he can use early on in his administration as they try to right the country financially, figure out how to restructure our tax policy if he wins, and if the Democrats carry the Senate, which many procrastinators are saying is possible and maybe probable, but that they built a launching pad or a ramp for him to start to work. These are all things that you can read in a whole variety of opinion newspapers, newsletters, from Politico to Huffington Post to a variety of other things that procrastinate along these ways. Eric, that's my presentation.
Great. Well, let me say thank you very much. I certainly appreciate your willingness to join us today, and also, the great part about the presentation is you focused really on both the policy side as well as the politics. So kind of covering the full terrain and scope of this. I'll open it up to questions, but let me start with the first one, which is, while we're waiting for CARES 2 or the HEROES Act, I'm wondering what you think in terms of some of your own members and these local economic developers, given that they're likely going to have fewer resources and revenues and maybe diminished capacity as some state and local governments have to, furlough or lay off employees. Are you seeing either anything that they're doing now that is sort of a deviation from the past? And are there things that they could be doing at this point as they, potentially wait for more funding from the federal government?
Well, let me answer that in 2 or 3 ways. One, there are a number of economic development organizations have had to lay off employees. Let me give you my best example of that, which is Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, as your students, as you may have picked up in one of their classes, the funding of local government is all over the place as you look around the country. In California, for instance, it is largely funded these days, or they rely more on sales tax than because they froze property taxes a number of years ago. In Ohio, particularly in the big cities, they rely upon income tax more to fund local government. Well, with many of the businesses having laid off employees or them not reporting to work in the city could not collect as much income tax. They furloughed the entire furloughed the entire development department, economic development and others for a period of time in Cincinnati. Illinois, a couple economic development organizations have disappeared completely. The issue, however, is not as dire in 2020 as it will be in 2021. So in many cases, governments already knew what they had available to them for the fiscal year 2020. However, the fiscal year was set up, and as your students probably are aware, some fiscal years are calendar years, some are July 1st to June 30th, some are September or October 1st to September 30th. They're all over the place in terms of how local governments and businesses set up their fiscal years. But the tax difficulties or the tax collection difficulties may get even worse for next year. And for some communities, next year has already started. So we're anticipating some more difficulties in funding economic development. However, if the next round does provide some bailout for state and local government, then economic development organizations will benefit, as well as all the other police, fire, general government services, street cleaning, whatever, will all benefit. And we're not, people like us who have been arguing for the state and local government support, we're not understanding for a second that Congress, like Mitch McConnell has suggested, bail out underwater retirement systems. We're just saying, hey, this virus has impacted the revenues. Let's at least try to make people as whole as the federal government can without getting crazy or bailing out bad decision making of local governments as well. I don't know the answer, frankly, Eric. Everybody's going to have to tighten. You guys are a state institution. I'm sure you guys are tightening your belt as well as state and local governments in their economic development programs. I'm just acknowledging the issue exists, and various people are going to solve it in a variety of different ways.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I know I could ask you, an hour or two's worth of questions, but let me open it up to others, because I'm sure there's many students or other faculty that have some burning questions as well.
Well, why don't you go for another one, Eric?
All right. So, in terms of the policies that, local actors can use sort of independent of the federal government providing additional money, do you see something like, maybe being more flexible around regulations of businesses as being really important? And the other side of this too is, are you seeing kind of greater collaboration among economic developers within the same region? I know it's kind of an environment where it's competition, but given fewer resources and capacities, are you seeing more collaboration?
I think we see more collaboration across the board anytime there's an economic downturn. If you've got a lot of money in your pocket, you don't have to talk to anybody. You just build a program. If you don't have a lot of money, you have to figure out how to be resourceful. So does it make sense for, let's take Baltimore. Does it make sense for the city of Baltimore and Baltimore County? Let's add Howard County to it, and let's add the city of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. Does it make sense for all of them to have an international trade program? And the answer is probably not. If one of them is really good at it, why doesn't everybody collaborate? So those are in fact, I'll tell you a funny story. A number of years ago, we were asked by people up in Buffalo to do a survey of all their economic development organizations. And one of the things that we discovered, and there were way too many. There were 40 or 50 of them. Every little city had one. And by the way, I'll tell you why every city had one. It's because everybody wants to capture the tax dollars that come from the location of a business. That's going to be, if there's income taxes, they're going to get income taxes. If there's a big facility and a lot of property taxes, they want it to fund their government, not the competing government. If you had tax-based sharing, which is very rare in the United States, you might have the ability not to have that level of competition. And my guess is there'd be a heck of a lot fewer economic developers as well, because every city wouldn't need one. But that's the card we've been dealt, so that's how people react. So we looked at all of these economic development organizations in the greater Buffalo area, and we discovered that there was, every small organization declared it was doing almost everything. So we encouraged two things. We encouraged people to collaborate. We encouraged the state to stop funding so many of the programs where there was not capacity to actually carry them out. But in these times, it does, from training of future employees to to economic development, to community development, even fire and police services. There are a lot of opportunities for collaboration. You don't have to go out and buy the newest and best piece of equipment if you're a fire department, if the city next door is willing to share it with you, and you can collaborate on it together. So yeah, it's an issue. So somebody has written here in the chat, the national debt has nearly tripled since 2008. What do you think the consequences of this will be, and what do you think should be done? So, I'm not an economist. I am at best a microeconomist. Economic development is dealing with, kind of micro systems and what we can do to help redevelop a neighborhood. But let me tell you what I'm hearing. One, Susan Helper, who was formerly with the Council of Economic Advisors, she was the chief economist at the U.S. Department of Commerce, did a paper on this. And she pointed out that our indebtedness after World War II was actually much greater than we've got now. And frankly, we worked our way out of it. Eventually, I mean, we're going to have some debt. But the second part of this increased debt was the stimulus that 2008, that would not include 4 years plus 8 years is 12. Yeah, it would have included the stimulus that was passed after the Bush administration, the subprime mortgage mess that we were left with in 2009. So that was about, if I remember correctly, it was a little under $1 trillion was the federal stimulus that Obama used. The second part of this has been what I consider unwise tax policy. We've given up a fair amount of our what should be coming into the Treasury with giving tax breaks kind of willy-nilly. There were tax breaks during the Bush administration, and Miller, who was the head of the Office of Management and Budget, fought against a tax break during the Bush administration. He was a political appointee who was asked to leave because he thought the war in Afghanistan was going to cost too much, and that we couldn't afford to give up the tax revenue that we would need to fund the war. Had we not given up a major tax break at that point, I don't think we would have had the indebtedness that we carried forward. And now, during the Trump administration, we've had another major slash to income. There's two sides to a debt. Do you have income and you have additional indebtedness? And I think that's what Biden is talking about. And I'm not saying that Biden's going to win a week from Tuesday. But I think if it's a Trump administration, they need to relook at that tax policy. If it's a Biden administration, we know he's already on record at wanting to look at income. But the other reason it is not a problem today has to do with interest rates. And interest rates, typically one of the big issues you have when you're carrying too much debt is you're in competition for capital, and interest rates normally slide up. And that's why you don't typically want a lot of indebtedness, but interest rates are at record lows. So as long as they're low, the indebtedness is not going to kill us. If they slide up, then it's going to kill us. And it's, I would agree that if your underlying question is it too much? Of course it's too much. We do need to start narrowing that down, but we also need to solve some of the problems and get by this, the collapse of our economy, which we still have too many people unemployed. We have too many businesses that are struggling. Our downtowns are not even operating in many cases because people aren't going downtown. Once we get past that, then we have to tackle this.
Great, thank you. Are there, I think we may have time for one more question.
I'll jump in if I may, Eric.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great presentation, Jeff. Really learned a lot. Really appreciate it. My question, just looking at the state level. So Maryland, we got our CARES money in April. We got another infusion in September. And then October 22nd, the governor, Larry Hogan, put in a quarter, 25% roughly, of the state's $1.1 billion rainy day fund. And that's going to many of the kinds of things that you described here, small businesses that are in hard-hit industries, expansion to programs, there's money for restaurants. Are you seeing other states supplementing in this way or in other ways?
Absolutely. And why do you have a rainy day fund? You have a rainy day fund for when it rains and it's pouring out. And so now part of it he has to hold back to make sure he can continue to fund state government if his revenues come up short. But you're exactly right. You know, your governor, and I'm not saying this for political reasons, you know, he appears to have done many of the right things. He's probably been, a handful of governors have been, you know, and not everybody loves their governor on any given day of the week, but, you know, he got PPE for the state of Maryland when the federal government wasn't being particularly responsive. He, you know, he's given up some of his rainy day funds. He, you know, reminded people to wear masks and things like that. He didn't allow, you know, some of the negative stereotypes of Asians to go unmatched or that. So, you know, good on him. But you're exactly right. The things that he is doing, we are seeing replicated by many of the states. You know, some of the state governors are still in denial that this is a big problem, unfortunately, but others are all in and trying to protect their businesses and their people to the best of their ability.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And, you know, we definitely appreciate you taking the time to be here today, knowing just how busy your life usually is. I can only imagine what it looks like right now. So, you know, again, on behalf of UMBC and the Political Science Department and the Center for Social Science Scholarship at UMBC, we thank you very much for being here and your willingness to share your time as well as your slides.
That's great. Eric, thank you for inviting me. I couldn't have done it before now because we just had a virtual annual conference a week and a half ago with 1,900 people, which our annual conference normally gets about 1,500 people. So we that was a major issue in its own right. So it was nice to spend time with everybody. I wish I could have done it in person, maybe next year.
That would be wonderful.
Great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care.
All right. Bye. Bye.
Bye.